Tyler's hands froze mid-reach toward the cardboard box, his breath catching in his throat as he saw what was inside. The rain had stopped, but his heart hadn't. It wasn't garbage like he'd hoped to find for shelter. It was a dying German shepherd puppy, barely breathing, one hind leg twisted at an impossible angle. The 12-year-old homeless boy stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the muddy slope of Miller's Gorge. His empty stomach clenched as he watched the tiny chest rise and fall in shallow, desperate gasps. This was supposed to be just another scavenging trip, another day of survival on the streets of Millbrook, Montana. Instead, Tyler found himself staring into dark eyes that held the same abandonment he recognized in his own reflection. The puppy's weak whimper cut through the mountain silence like a prayer. "Don't die on me," Tyler whispered, his voice cracking as he reached into the box with trembling fingers. We're all each other's got now. How had a broken boy and a crippled dog become each other's only salvation? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 weeks earlier, Tyler Matthews had learned that 12-year-old boys could disappear just as easily as loose change between couch cushions. Nobody looked for what they didn't want to find. The streets of Millbrook, Montana, population 3,200, had swallowed him whole the day his mother, Sarah Beth, chose her needle over her son for the final time. "You're too much trouble, Tyler," she'd said, eyes already glazed with that familiar distance. "I can't do this anymore." The motel door had closed with a soft click, leaving him standing in the parking lot with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing realization that even mothers had their limits. 8 months later, Tyler had carved out an existence in the forgotten corners of the small mountain town. His home was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts, where broken windows let in more cold than light. His routine was survival, collecting bottles behind Thompson's diner at dawn, waiting for the saint. Mary's soup kitchen to open at noon, and avoiding the places where concerned adults might ask uncomfortable questions. 3 blocks away, in a sprawling Victorian mansion that had seen better decades, Rose Peterson set 2 place settings for breakfast every morning before remembering she lived alone. At 78, she'd been Harold's wife for 52 years before cancer took him. Now, the 12-room house echoed with the absence of conversation, and her prayers had evolved from gratitude to desperate bargaining. "Lord," she whispered each morning at her kitchen window, watching the world wake up without her, "send me someone to love before I join Harold." Her late husband's mining fortune sat untouched in the bank. While she measured her days in crossword puzzles and prescription bottles, Dr. Sarah Mitchell had her own ghosts. At 52, she ran the Mountain View Animal Clinic with the methodical precision of someone who refused to let emotion cloud judgment. 3 years ago, her 7-year-old daughter Emma had chased their family German shepherd into traffic, and Sarah's world had shattered in the space between a child's laughter and screeching brakes. Now she saved animals because she couldn't save the one life that mattered most. 15 miles outside town, Frank Miller's hatred burned as hot as the Montana sun. His 2,000-acre ranch had once echoed with his son Tommy's laughter. But that ended the day an untrained German shepherd's teeth found his 8-year-old boy's throat. 3 years of whiskey hadn't dulled the memory, and his wife's departure had only sharpened his rage. Every German shepherd was Tommy's killer in Frank's eyes, and his solution was simple: eliminate the threat before it could kill again. None of them knew that their separate sorrows were about to collide in the most unexpected way. Tyler needed a family. Rose needed a purpose. Sarah needed redemption. Frank needed healing. And somewhere in the darkness of Miller's Gorge, a German shepherd puppy named Max needed a miracle. Sometimes broken pieces find each other and create something stronger than what came before. The morning sun cast long shadows across Miller Ranch as Jake Morrison walked toward the barn, his boots crunching on frost-covered grass. At 23, he'd worked for Frank Miller for 2 years, long enough to know when his boss was in one of his dark moods. The empty whiskey bottle on the porch and the shotgun leaning against the doorframe told him everything he needed to know about how Frank had spent the night. "Jake!" Frank's voice cracked like a whip across the yard. "Get over here. We got a problem." Jake found Frank standing over a wooden crate in the barn, his face twisted with familiar rage. Inside, a German Shepherd puppy no bigger than a loaf of bread struggled to stand on 3 legs. The fourth, his right hind leg, was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly deformed from birth. The tiny creature's dark eyes held intelligence despite his obvious pain. "Damn bitch died birthing this cripple," Frank spat, his hands shaking with barely controlled fury. "Should have known better than to breed that bloodline." Jake knelt beside the crate, watching the puppy's futile attempts to stand. "He's just a baby, Mr. Miller. Maybe the vet could—" "No vet." Frank's voice cut through the air like ice. "That devil breed killed my Tommy, and I won't have another one of them on my land, not even a broken one." The memory hit Frank like a physical blow, as it always did. Tommy, 8 years old, with gap-toothed grin and freckles across his nose, running through these same fields. The neighbor's untrained German Shepherd had gotten loose, confused and aggressive, seeing the running child as prey. By the time Frank reached them, it was too late. Tommy's last words were a whispered, "Daddy, help him." Not himself, but the dog that was being beaten away by panicked adults. "Take it to Miller's Gorge," Frank ordered, his voice hollow. "Let nature handle what I can't stomach doing myself." Jake felt his stomach twist. Miller's Gorge was 15 miles of winding mountain road that ended in a remote canyon where Frank had been dumping ranch refuse for years. Nothing survived out there. It was too far from civilization, too harsh for anything small and helpless. "Mr. Miller, maybe we could find him a home. There's folks who might—" "Are you deaf, boy?" Frank's hand moved toward the shotgun. "That thing goes to the gorge today, or you can find yourself another job. Hell, find yourself another town." Jake looked down at the puppy, who had given up trying to stand and was now lying on his side, breathing in rapid, shallow pants. The little guy's tail gave a weak wag when Jake's shadow fell across him, trusting and hopeful despite everything. An hour later, Jake's rusted pickup truck wound through the mountain roads toward Miller's Gorge. The puppy rode in a cardboard box beside him, wrapped in an old horse blanket that smelled of hay and better times. Every few minutes, Jake would hear a soft whimper, and his resolve would weaken further. "I'm sorry, little fella," he murmured, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I got mouths to feed at home. Can't lose this job over you." But his words rang hollow even to himself. His girlfriend Mary was 3 months pregnant, and the job market in Millbrook was thinner than mountain air. Frank Miller paid better than anyone else in the county, even if the cost was sometimes a man's conscience. The gorge stretched before them like an open wound in the earth, deep and shadowed even at midday. Jake parked at the edge and carried the box to a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock. It would protect the puppy from rain, at least for a while. It was a small mercy in a merciless situation. "Maybe someone will find you," Jake whispered as he set the box down. "Maybe a hiker or someone." The puppy's dark eyes followed his movements, still trusting, still hoping. Jake reached into his lunch pail and left a piece of bologna beside the box. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he drove away, Jake's hands trembled on the steering wheel. In his rearview mirror, he could see the cardboard box growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. He told himself he'd done what he had to do, followed orders, protected his future family. but the puppy's trusting eyes haunted him with every mile. 15 miles away, Tyler Matthews was beginning his daily scavenge for survival, unaware that fate was drawing him toward Miller's Gorge, and a meeting that would change everything. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as tragedy, and miracles are born from the moments when good people make terrible choices. The mountain wind carried no hint of what was coming, only the promise that some stories begin at the exact moment when hope seems most lost. Tyler's stomach had been growling for 2 days straight when he decided to venture beyond his usual scavenging routes. The area around Thompson's diner had been picked clean by other desperate souls, and the soup kitchen wouldn't open for another 6 hours. Desperation drove him toward the hiking trails that wound through the foothills outside Millbrook, where weekend tourists sometimes dropped bottles or forgot camping supplies. The morning air bit at his exposed skin through the holes in his jacket, but Tyler had learned to ignore discomfort. Pain was just noise now, background static in the symphony of survival. He picked his way carefully along the rocky trail, eyes scanning for anything useful. Aluminum cans worth 5 cents each, discarded food containers that might still hold scraps, maybe even a forgotten water bottle. The sound reached him first, so faint he almost missed it beneath the whisper of wind through pine needles. A soft whimpering, barely audible but distinctly alive. Tyler froze, his head tilting as he tried to locate the source. In 8 months on the streets, he'd learned that strange sounds usually meant trouble, but this was different. This sounded like something small and hurt. Following the sound led him off the main trail and down a treacherous slope toward Miller's Gorge. Tyler had heard stories about this place. How Frank Miller dumped refuse here. How nothing good ever came from venturing too close. But the whimpering grew stronger as he descended, and something in that sound called to the lonely places in his heart. The cardboard box sat beneath a rocky overhang like an altar of abandonment. Tyler approached cautiously, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd seen enough cruelty in his short life to know that people threw away more than just garbage. Sometimes they threw away lives. When he peered inside, Tyler's breath caught in his throat. The German Shepherd puppy was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 4 months old, with fur the color of wheat and shadows. But it was the eyes that stopped Tyler cold, dark, intelligent, and filled with a pain that went beyond physical hurt. This was the look of something that had been discarded, unwanted, left to die alone. The puppy's right hind leg was twisted inward, clearly deformed from birth. Even lying down, Tyler could see the awkward angle, the way the limb refused to bear weight. Someone had looked at this imperfection and decided the whole creature was worthless. "Hey there, little guy," Tyler whispered, his voice cracking with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. "What are you doing way out here?" The puppy's tail gave a weak wag at the sound of a human voice, hope flickering in those dark eyes like a candle in wind. Tyler felt his chest tighten with recognition. He knew that look, had seen it in his own reflection in store windows and puddles. It was the expression of someone waiting for rescue that might never come. Tyler reached into the box with trembling fingers, his touch gentle as he assessed the puppy's condition. The little guy was dehydrated, his nose dry and warm. His breathing was shallow but steady, and when Tyler's hand made contact with his fur, the puppy leaned into the touch with desperate gratitude. "Somebody threw you away too, didn't they?" Tyler murmured, his voice thick with understanding. "Thought you weren't worth fixing." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was Tyler, a boy his own mother had abandoned, finding a dog someone else had discarded. 2 broken souls meeting in a place where broken things were meant to disappear forever. But Tyler saw something in this puppy that others had missed. Not weakness, but strength. Not disability, but different ability. Not worthless, but priceless. Tyler's own stomach cramped with hunger, reminding him of the single can of soup waiting back at his warehouse hideout. It was supposed to be dinner, his only guaranteed meal until the soup kitchen opened tomorrow. But looking at the puppy's condition, Tyler knew there was really no choice at all. "You hungry, boy?" Tyler asked softly, already knowing the answer. "I got something back home. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." The decision to take the puppy changed everything. Tyler couldn't carry him in the cardboard box up the steep slope, so he wrapped the little guy carefully in his own worn jacket, feeling the rapid heartbeat against his chest. The puppy didn't struggle, seeming to understand instinctively that he was being rescued rather than moved toward greater danger. The climb back to the trail tested Tyler's endurance, but he moved carefully, protecting his fragile cargo with every step. More than once, he had to stop and rest, whispering reassurances to keep them both calm. The puppy remained still, trusting completely in this stranger who had chosen salvation over self-preservation. As they walked the long miles back toward town, Tyler found himself talking to his new companion, sharing thoughts he'd kept locked inside for months. "I'm going to call you Max," he said, remembering his grandfather, the only adult who had ever made him feel wanted before Alzheimer's stole him away. "That was my grandpa's name. He was good people, like I think you're going to be." Max's response was a soft sigh that might have been contentment or exhaustion, but Tyler chose to interpret it as agreement. They were both damaged goods now, two rejects finding each other in a world that had little patience for imperfection. But maybe that was enough. Maybe being unwanted by everyone else meant they could want each other completely. The warehouse beckoned in the distance, offering shelter and the promise of shared soup. Tyler quickened his pace despite his fatigue, eager to begin whatever came next. He had no idea how to care for a disabled puppy, no knowledge of veterinary medicine or animal nutrition. But he had something more valuable than expertise. He had understanding. "We're going to be okay, Max," Tyler whispered as they approached their new home together. "Broken don't mean worthless. It just means we're going to have to be creative about how we love each other." The abandoned warehouse had never felt like home until Max arrived. Tyler had been squatting there for 3 months, drawn by the building's forgotten status and the loading dock that provided some shelter from Montana's unpredictable weather. But it wasn't until he carried Max across the threshold wrapped in his own jacket that the hollow space began to feel like something more than just a hiding place. Tyler had fashioned a crude nest in the corner farthest from the broken windows, using cardboard he'd salvaged from behind the grocery store and newspapers from the library's recycling bin. Now he carefully arranged these materials into something resembling a bed, placing Max gently in the center. The puppy's dark eyes followed Tyler's every movement, alert despite his obvious exhaustion. "First things first," Tyler murmured, opening his last can of soup with a rusty opener he'd found months ago. "We got to get some food in you." The chicken noodle soup was meant to be Tyler's dinner, possibly his only meal until the soup kitchen opened the next day. But watching Max struggle to lift his head, Tyler knew the choice was simple. He poured half the soup into a clean plastic container, letting it cool while he examined Max's injured leg more closely. The deformity was worse than Tyler had initially thought. The leg wasn't just twisted. It seemed shorter than the others, with the paw turned inward at an impossible angle. Max couldn't put any weight on it, and even gentle touching made him whimper. Tyler's heart ached with recognition. He knew what it felt like to be seen as broken, to have people look away because fixing you seemed too hard. "It's okay, boy," Tyler whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Different don't mean less. My grandpa used to say that about himself after his stroke. Said being broken just meant you had to find new ways to be whole." Max managed to lap up some of the cooled soup, his pink tongue working slowly but steadily. Tyler rationed the rest for himself, savoring each spoonful while planning their survival strategy. One can of soup between them wouldn't last long, and Tyler's usual scavenging routine would be complicated by having to care for Max. But somehow, sharing the meal made it taste better than any feast Tyler could remember. 3 blocks away, Rose Peterson was settling into her nightly routine of loneliness. She'd eaten dinner alone at the massive dining room table, made conversation with Harold's empty chair, and was now washing a single plate while staring out her kitchen window toward the industrial part of town. The abandoned warehouse was barely visible through the darkness, but Rose had noticed changes in the area lately. Small signs that someone might be living rough in one of those forgotten buildings. "Harold," she whispered to the empty kitchen, "I think there's a child out there with nowhere to go. What would you want me to do?" The silence that answered her was deafening, but Rose had learned to find guidance in memory. Harold had always been the kindest man she knew, the type who stopped for stranded motorists and paid for strangers' groceries when their cards were declined. He would have wanted her to help, but Rose had spent 2 years learning to fear her own impulses toward generosity. Too many people saw her loneliness as opportunity, her wealth as target practice for elaborate sob stories. Still, something about the warehouse nagged at her conscience. In the morning, she decided, she would drive by and see if her suspicions were correct. If there really was a child living out there, surely there was something she could do without becoming a victim of her own good intentions. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was finishing her evening rounds at the Mountain View Animal Clinic, checking on the 3 dogs and 2 cats currently boarding for various medical procedures. The clinic felt too quiet at night, too much like the house she'd sold after Emma died because every room echoed with her daughter's laughter. Sarah had converted the storage room into a small apartment rather than face another empty home, surrounding herself with the constant needs of healing animals. As she locked up the medicine cabinet, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the German Shepherd puppy she'd noticed Jake Morrison carrying toward his truck that morning. She'd been driving past Miller Ranch on her way to a farm call and had glimpsed the cardboard box, the way Jake's shoulders slumped with reluctance. Frank Miller's hatred of German Shepherds was well known in the county, and Sarah had her suspicions about what Frank did with any of that breed born on his property. The memory of Emma flickered through her mind like candlelight, her 7-year-old daughter's fierce love for their family dog, Thor, and how that love had led Emma to chase him into traffic. Sarah had blamed the dog initially, blamed herself eternally, but the rational part of her mind knew that love and tragedy sometimes intertwined in ways that defied logic. "I couldn't save you, Emma," Sarah whispered to the clinic's shadows, "but maybe I can save someone else." Back at the warehouse, Tyler was discovering that caring for a disabled dog required more creativity than he'd anticipated. Max needed to relieve himself but couldn't walk properly, so Tyler fashioned a sling from torn bed sheets to support the puppy's hindquarters while he hopped on 3 legs. It was clumsy and exhausting for both of them, but Max's tail wagged with determined gratitude that broke Tyler's heart. The nights were the hardest. Max would whimper softly in his sleep, his body jerking as phantom pain from his twisted leg invaded his dreams. Tyler would wake instantly, his hand finding Max's fur in the darkness, whispering reassurances until they both settled back into restless slumber. On the 4th night, Max crawled from his nest and curled against Tyler's side, sharing warmth and comfort in the oldest language known to man and dog. "You're not just broken," Tyler murmured into Max's fur. "You're brave, braver than most people I know." Tyler's daily routine had evolved around Max's needs. He would wake before dawn to help Max outside, then venture out for his usual bottle hunting and scavenging while Max slept safely in their hidden corner. The warehouse was large enough that Tyler could establish their living space far from the entrances, behind stacks of abandoned machinery that provided both concealment and wind protection. Food remained their biggest challenge. Tyler found himself making increasingly desperate choices, stealing when scavenging failed, venturing into more dangerous territory for better pickings. He discovered that pet food was expensive and that Max's condition required nutrition Tyler couldn't afford. So Tyler shared everything: his soup kitchen meals, his dumpster discoveries, even the sandwich someone had given him outside the post office. Rose Peterson made her decision on a Tuesday morning when the autumn air carried the promise of winter's approach. She loaded her Crown Victoria with supplies she hoped might help whoever was living in the warehouse district: blankets, canned goods, bottled water, and a thermos of hot coffee. She told herself she was just being a good neighbor, but her heart hammered with the possibility of finding purpose in action. The warehouse looked even more desolate in daylight, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring across the industrial wasteland. Rose parked carefully and approached on foot, calling out softly so she wouldn't startle anyone who might be hiding inside. "Hello, I'm Rose Peterson. I live over on Elm Street. I just wanted to see if anyone needed help." The silence stretched long enough that Rose began to think she'd been wrong, that the building was truly abandoned. Then she heard it. A soft whimpering that definitely came from an animal, followed by a young voice whispering urgently for quiet. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Rose called gently. "I have food and blankets if anyone needs them." Tyler's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Adult interest in his situation usually meant authorities, questions, separation from everything he'd built. But Max needed medical attention Tyler couldn't provide, and winter was coming to Montana with its legendary brutality. Maybe this was the chance he'd been praying for without realizing it. "There's a dog." Tyler's voice came from deep within the warehouse, carefully modulated to carry without revealing his exact location. "He's hurt. I've been taking care of him, but I don't know what I'm doing." Rose's heart clenched at the youth in that voice, the careful wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust adult intentions. "How long have you been out here, honey?" "Long enough." Tyler's answer carried volumes of pain compressed into 2 words. "The dog, he was thrown away. Left to die. I couldn't leave him there." "Can I see him? I might be able to help." The silence stretched again before Tyler finally emerged from behind the machinery, carrying Max carefully in his arms. Rose's breath caught at the sight of them. A boy who couldn't be more than 12 or 13, thin as winter branches, cradling a German Shepherd puppy with obvious love and devotion. Both were dirty, both were thin, but the bond between them was unmistakable. "Oh, sweetheart," Rose whispered, her eyes filling with tears she hadn't shed since Harold's funeral. "Look what you've done for him." Tyler's defenses rose immediately at the emotion in her voice. Adults cried when they felt guilty about not helping, when they wanted to feel better about themselves without actually changing anything. "We don't need pity. We just need to be left alone." "Not pity," Rose said firmly, setting down her bag of supplies. "Admiration. That dog is lucky to have found you." She studied Max's condition with the practical eye of someone who'd lived through enough emergencies to recognize genuine need. "But he's going to need medical attention soon. That leg needs proper care." "I know." Tyler's voice cracked with the weight of responsibility he couldn't carry alone. "I've been trying to figure out how to get him to a vet without losing him. People like me, we don't get to keep things we love." Rose felt her heart break and rebuild itself in the space of those words. Here was the purpose she'd been praying for, wrapped in the most unexpected package imaginable. Not just a child who needed help, but a child whose capacity for love had already proven itself greater than most adults she knew. "Maybe we can figure something out together," Rose said carefully, not wanting to spook Tyler with too much too fast. "I know a veterinarian who might be willing to help, but first, let's get you both somewhere warm with some decent food." Tyler looked down at Max, who was gazing up at him with complete trust, and felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a leap of faith. The community's first real glimpse of Tyler and Max came on a gray Thursday morning when necessity forced them into the open. Max had developed a fever during the night, his small body burning with heat that terrified Tyler more than his own hunger ever could. Rose Peterson's tentative friendship over the past week had provided some relief, food, blankets, and most importantly, hope. But Max's condition was deteriorating beyond what kindness and canned soup could fix. Tyler carried Max through Millbrook's main street toward the Mountain View Animal Clinic, his heart hammering with each step. They made an unusual sight. A rail-thin boy in clothes 3 sizes too big, cradling a German shepherd puppy like a precious treasure. Max's head lolled against Tyler's chest, his breathing shallow and rapid, tiny whimpers escaping with each labored breath. "Just hold on, boy," Tyler whispered fiercely. "We're gonna get you help, I promise, Mrs." Henderson, who ran the town's only diner, was sweeping her front steps when she spotted them. The sight stopped her cold. This child she'd seen rummaging through dumpsters, now clearly caring for a sick animal with the devotion of a loving parent. Her first instinct was to call someone, report the situation to authorities who could handle it properly. But something in Tyler's desperate tenderness made her reconsider. "Honey," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. "That puppy looks mighty sick. You heading to Dr. Mitchell's?" Tyler nodded curtly, not slowing his pace. He'd learned that adult concern usually came with strings attached, questions he couldn't answer without risking everything. But Mrs. Henderson surprised him by stepping into the street. "Let me drive you. It's still 6 blocks, and that baby needs help now." The offer hung in the autumn air like a lifeline Tyler was afraid to grab. Accepting help meant revealing how desperate their situation had become, but Max's labored breathing left no room for pride. Tyler nodded gratefully, climbing into Mrs. Henderson's sedan with Max still pressed against his chest. "Been wondering about you too," Mrs. Henderson said gently as she drove. "Heard you've been taking care of him on your own. That's something special, what you're doing." Tyler's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't afford to show. He was thrown away, left to die. "I couldn't let that happen." "No, I don't suppose you could." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried decades of maternal wisdom. "Takes a special heart to love something the world's given up on." At the clinic, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was between appointments when the unlikely pair arrived. Through her window, she watched Tyler emerge from the sedan with infinite care, his young face etched with worry that belonged on someone 3 times his age. Recognition hit her like cold water. This was the boy she'd been noticing around town, the one who never begged but moved through Millbrook like a ghost seeking only invisibility. The German shepherd puppy in his arms made her breath catch. Sarah's trained eye immediately assessed Max's condition, dehydrated, feverish, malnourished, and obviously disabled. But it was the way Tyler held him that stopped her heart. With the desperate love of someone who had already lost too much. "Please," Tyler said when she opened the clinic door, his voice breaking with exhaustion and fear. "He's burning up. I don't know what to do anymore." Sarah's professional mask slipped as she looked into Tyler's eyes and saw her own reflection from 3 years ago. A parent facing the possible loss of the most important thing in their world. Without a word, she stepped aside to let them in, her decision made before her rational mind could interfere. "Bring him to the exam room," she said quietly. "Let's see what we're dealing with." As Sarah examined Max, Tyler watched every movement with hawk-like intensity, ready to snatch his companion away at the first sign of judgment or condemnation. But Sarah's hands were gentle, her voice soothing as she spoke to Max in the universal language of healing. She checked his temperature, listened to his heart, examined his malformed leg with careful thoroughness. "How long has he been running this fever?" Sarah asked, not looking at Tyler but focusing entirely on Max. "Started last night. Got worse this morning." Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "Is he gonna die?" The question hung between them like a prayer and a curse. Sarah continued her examination, buying time while she processed the depth of care this young boy had somehow provided. Max was malnourished but not starving, dehydrated but not critically so. Someone had been sharing their food, their water, their warmth with this disabled puppy despite having little to spare. "He's got an infection in his leg," Sarah said finally. "The deformity makes him prone to complications, and living rough hasn't helped. But with proper antibiotics and care, he should recover." Tyler's knees nearly buckled with relief. "How much? For the medicine, I mean. I can work. Find a way to pay you back." Sarah turned to study Tyler properly for the first time, seeing past the dirty clothes and hollow cheeks to the fierce determination underneath. This child had been caring for a disabled animal with resources most adults would consider inadequate, and somehow keeping them both alive. The parallel to her own situation 3 years ago was impossible to ignore. "We'll figure something out," Sarah said carefully. "For now, let's focus on getting him better." But their conversation was interrupted by the sharp slam of a truck door outside. Through the clinic window, Tyler saw Frank Miller approaching with purposeful strides, his face set in familiar lines of rage. Jake Morrison followed reluctantly, his expression apologetic but resigned. Tyler instinctively moved between Max and the window, his body language screaming protection despite his size disadvantage. "We need to go," he said urgently to Sarah. "Right now." "Nobody's going anywhere," Sarah replied firmly, stepping forward as Frank burst through the clinic door. "I knew it!" Frank snarled, his eyes immediately finding Max on the examination table. "I told Jake to dispose of that devil breed weeks ago, but here it is, spreading disease and God knows what else." "This is a veterinary clinic," Sarah said coldly, her professional authority snapping into place. "You have no right to—" "I have every right!" Frank's voice rose to a shout. "That's my property, born on my land, and I want it destroyed before it can hurt someone." Tyler stepped forward, his young voice cracking with emotion but steady with conviction. "He's not your property anymore. You threw him away. People don't get to claim things they abandoned." Frank's face purpled with rage. "You little street rat, you don't know what you're messing with. That breed is dangerous, and a crippled one is worse than useless." "He's not dangerous," Tyler shot back, his hands clenched into fists. "He's loyal and smart and brave. Just because he's different doesn't mean he's worthless." The confrontation drew attention from the street. Mrs. Henderson, who had waited outside to ensure Tyler and Max were safe, called Sheriff Tom Williams when she heard the shouting. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered outside the clinic, drawn by the rare drama unfolding in their quiet town. Rose Peterson arrived as the argument reached its peak, having been contacted by Mrs. Henderson's worried phone call. She pushed through the crowd and into the clinic just as Frank was demanding that Sarah euthanize Max immediately. "Over my dead body," Rose declared with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "That boy has been caring for that animal better than most pet owners I know." Frank spun to face her, his rage now directed at this new target. "Mrs. Peterson, you don't understand. That breed killed my son. Every time I see one of them, I see Tommy's blood on the ground." The clinic fell silent. Frank's pain was real, his loss undeniable, but Tyler refused to let tragedy justify more tragedy. "I'm sorry about your son," Tyler said quietly, his voice carrying surprising maturity. "But Max didn't kill him. Max never hurt anybody. He can't even walk right, but he still tries to protect me. That's not evil. That's love." Sheriff Williams chose that moment to enter, his presence immediately changing the dynamics of the confrontation. A fair man in his 50s, Tom had known Frank since childhood and understood his pain, but he also recognized injustice when he saw it. "Frank, you need to calm down," Tom said firmly. "This is a medical facility, and Dr. Mitchell has every right to treat any animal brought to her." "That animal is diseased, dangerous, and needs to be put down," Frank insisted, but his voice had lost some of its earlier fury. Sarah stepped forward, her medical authority lending weight to her words. "This puppy poses no danger to anyone. He's been well cared for despite challenging circumstances, and with proper treatment, he can live a full life." "A full life?" Frank laughed bitterly. "Look at him. Crippled, homeless, dependent on a kid who can't even take care of himself. What kind of life is that?" Tyler's response came from the deepest place in his heart, carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned to find value in being undervalued. "It's the kind of life where somebody loves you no matter what," he said simply. "Where being broken doesn't make you less, just different. Where every day you wake up grateful because somebody chose you when they didn't have to." The silence that followed was broken only by Max's soft whimper as he lifted his head to look at Tyler. In that moment, everyone in the clinic could see what Tyler saw. Not a damaged animal, but a soul choosing love over fear, hope over despair. It was Rose Peterson who broke the stalemate with characteristic decisiveness. "I'll take responsibility for both of them," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems. "Tyler and Max can stay with me while we sort out the legal details." The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, the harsh reality of the streets and the possibility of something better. Tyler looked down at Max, whose dark eyes seemed to trust whatever decision his protector would make. Sometimes salvation comes wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes the broken pieces fit together to create something stronger than what came before. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night, shattering the fragile peace that Tyler and Max had found in Rose Peterson's Victorian mansion. Tyler jolted awake in his new bedroom, the first real bedroom he'd had in almost a year, to the sound of Rose's voice rising in distress from downstairs. "What do you mean she has rights?" Rose was saying, her usually controlled voice cracking with emotion. "That woman abandoned him 8 months ago. She left him to die on the streets." Tyler's blood turned to ice water. He knew that voice on the other end of the line, even filtered through Rose's telephone. Sarah Beth Matthews, his mother, had finally surfaced from whatever drug-induced haze had consumed her since the day she walked away. Tyler slipped from his bed and crept to the top of the stairs, Max limping faithfully beside him on his 3 good legs. "I don't care what the law says," Rose continued, her voice growing stronger with righteous anger. "That boy has been through hell and he's finally safe. I won't let you destroy that." But Tyler could hear the defeat creeping into Rose's voice, the reluctant acceptance of a system that valued blood relations over actual love. In the 3 weeks since he'd moved into Rose's home, Tyler had discovered what family could feel like. Rose had taught him to use proper silverware, helped him with homework from the correspondence courses she'd enrolled him in, and sat with him during Max's difficult recovery from surgery to repair his infected leg. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had performed the operation for free, her skilled hands guided by a mix of professional duty and personal redemption. Max would never walk normally, but the surgery had eliminated his pain and given him mobility he'd never had before. Watching Max take his first confident steps on his repaired leg had been one of the happiest moments of Tyler's life. Now it was all about to be destroyed. Tyler heard Rose hang up the phone with more force than necessary, followed by the sound of her pacing across the hardwood floors of the living room. He wanted to go to her, to comfort the woman who had become more of a grandmother than he'd ever imagined possible, but fear kept him frozen on the stairs. Max seemed to sense his distress, pressing his warm body against Tyler's leg and looking up with those intelligent dark eyes that had learned to read human emotion with uncanny accuracy. The dog had thrived in Rose's home, his coat now glossy and full, his movements confident despite his disability. He'd become the town's unofficial mascot, accompanying Tyler to the general store and greeting visitors with gentle dignity that won over even the most skeptical residents. "Tyler?" Rose's voice called softly from below. "I know you're awake, sweetheart." "Come down here." Tyler descended the stairs slowly, Max following with his distinctive three-legged gait that had become as familiar as breathing. Rose stood in the living room wearing her quilted bathrobe, her usually perfect silver hair disheveled, her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting impossible battles. "She wants you back," Rose said without preamble, her voice carefully controlled. "Your mother. She's been clean for 30 days, she says, and she's demanding her parental rights be restored." Tyler felt the world tilt sideways. "I won't go back to her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Rose moved to the couch and patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit with me. We need to talk about what's happening." Tyler settled next to Rose, Max immediately jumping up to position himself protectively across both their laps. The weight of the dog was comforting, a living reminder of the life they'd built together over the past months. "Your mother has a lawyer," Rose continued, her voice gentle but honest. "Someone's paying for her to get cleaned up, to present herself as a reformed person. She claims she's ready to be a mother again." "What about what I want?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking with the injustice of it all. "Don't I get a say?" Rose's eyes filled with tears. She'd been fighting since the phone call. In situations like this, the courts usually favor reuniting children with their biological parents, especially when the parent can demonstrate they've addressed their problems. The silence that followed was broken only by Max's contented sighing as he settled more comfortably across their laps. Tyler buried his fingers in the dog's soft fur, drawing strength from the contact. "What about Max?" Tyler asked, voicing the fear that terrified him most. "She won't let me keep him. She hates dogs, says they're dirty and expensive." Rose's composure finally cracked. "Oh, Tyler," she whispered, pulling him close. "I'm so sorry. I've been trying to adopt you legally, but the process takes time, and now she shows up and ruins everything," Tyler finished bitterly. "Just like always." They sat in the pre-dawn darkness, holding each other and the dog who had brought them together, all three knowing that their makeshift family was about to be torn apart by forces beyond their control. Rose had money, influence, and connections, but none of that meant anything against the immutable law that gave parents rights over their children regardless of how badly they'd failed in the past. "There's something else," Rose said reluctantly. "The lawyer mentioned something about media interest. Apparently your story with Max has attracted attention beyond Millbrook. Someone wants to do a documentary about homeless children and their pets." Tyler's stomach dropped. The last thing he wanted was to become a poster child for society's failures, to have his private pain turned into entertainment for people who would watch his story and then change the channel without changing anything. "I won't do it," Tyler said firmly. "I won't let them turn Max into some kind of symbol." "I don't think you'll have a choice," Rose replied sadly. "Your mother's lawyer seems to think the publicity could help her case, show her as a reformed person who wants to reconnect with her famous son." Famous. The word tasted bitter in Tyler's mouth. He'd never wanted fame, only safety. Never wanted attention, only acceptance. The irony was crushing. Just as he'd found the family he'd always dreamed of, The world was conspiring to take it away and put his heartbreak on display. Max lifted his head and looked directly at Tyler, as if sensing the depth of his human's distress. Those dark eyes held wisdom that transcended species, understanding that transcended words. In that moment, Tyler realized that no matter what happened, no matter where the legal system sent him, the bond he'd formed with this remarkable dog would survive. Love like theirs couldn't be legislated away or transferred like property. "We'll fight this," Rose said fiercely, her voice regaining its strength. "I have lawyers too, good ones. We'll find a way to keep you both safe." But Tyler could hear the uncertainty beneath her bravado, the knowledge that money and influence could only do so much against a system designed to reunite families regardless of whether those reunions served anyone's best interests. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Tyler held Max close and tried to memorize the feeling of safety, of belonging, of being wanted exactly as he was. Soon, very soon, he would need these memories to sustain him through whatever came next. The battle for Tyler's future was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Not just his own happiness, but the life of the three-legged dog who had taught him that love was stronger than abandonment, that loyalty was more valuable than perfection, and that sometimes the most broken things created the most beautiful bonds. The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken dreams when Tyler walked in holding Rose Peterson's hand, Max limping faithfully beside them on his custom-fitted prosthetic that Dr. Sarah Mitchell had designed. 3 months had passed since that devastating phone call, 3 months of legal battles and media circus that had turned Tyler's private pain into public spectacle. Now, at 13, he sat in the witness stand facing the judge who would decide his fate. Across the courtroom, Sarah Beth Matthews looked nothing like the hollow-eyed woman who had abandoned him in a motel parking lot 14 months ago. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, her clothes expensive and conservative, her makeup flawless. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as her lawyer painted a picture of a reformed mother ready to reclaim her son from the elderly woman who had taken advantage of a vulnerable child. "Your Honor," Sarah Beth's attorney was saying, "my client has completed a 90-day rehabilitation program and has been clean for over 4 months. She's secured stable housing and employment, and she's ready to provide Tyler with the family structure he needs. While we appreciate Mrs. Peterson's temporary care, blood family is irreplaceable." Tyler's stomach churned as he watched his mother perform contrition for the judge's benefit. He'd seen this act before. The tears, the promises, the carefully rehearsed words about wanting to make things right. It had fooled social workers and counselors in the past, buying Sarah Beth time to relapse into the cycle of drugs and abandonment that had defined Tyler's childhood. Rose's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, who'd driven down from Billings specifically for this case, stood to cross-examine. "Ms. Matthews, how many times have you completed rehabilitation programs in the past 5 years?" That's not relevant," Sarah Beth stammered, her composure cracking slightly. "This time is different." "Is it? Because according to court records, you've made similar promises after at least 3 previous rehabilitation attempts. You've had Tyler removed from your care twice before for neglect and abandonment. What makes this time different?" Tyler watched his mother's face cycle through practiced emotions: hurt, determination, maternal love. But he could see through the performance to the calculation underneath, the way her eyes flicked toward the documentary cameras that had been permitted in the courtroom. "I found Jesus," Sarah Beth said finally, the words ringing hollow in the formal space. "I've accepted responsibility for my mistakes, and I want to build a relationship with my son." "And the dog?" Margaret Chen asked, gesturing toward Max, who sat alertly at Tyler's feet. "Are you prepared to care for Tyler's companion, who requires special medical attention due to his disability?" Sarah Beth's mask slipped entirely for a moment, revealing the disgust she'd always felt toward animals. Dogs are expensive, and that one is damaged. It would be better for everyone if Tyler learned to form healthy relationships with people instead of clinging to damaged animals. The words hit Tyler like physical blows. In that moment, every doubt he'd harbored about fighting this battle evaporated. Sarah Beth saw Max the same way she'd always seen Tyler, as damaged goods, inconvenient burdens that complicated her life. The difference was that Tyler had learned his own worth through loving Max unconditionally. "Your Honor," Tyler said, his voice cutting through the courtroom's murmur. "May I speak?" Judge Patricia Hawkins, a woman in her 60s who'd presided over family court for 20 years, studied Tyler with careful attention. Something in his demeanor, the straight spine, the clear eyes, the protective hand resting on Max's head, spoke of maturity beyond his 13 years. "This is highly irregular," the judge said slowly, "but given the unique circumstances of this case, I'll allow it. Tyler, you may address the court." Tyler stood, Max automatically adjusting his position to remain close. The courtroom fell silent, even the documentary cameras focusing on this moment that would determine not just his future, but the future of the dog who'd saved his life. "My mother says she's changed," Tyler began, his voice steady despite the enormous weight of the moment. "Maybe she has. Maybe this time is different. But I've changed too, and I can't go back to being the kid who believed her promises." He looked directly at Sarah Beth, seeing her flinch under his steady gaze. "When you left me at that motel, you said I was too much trouble. You were right. Love is trouble. It's hard work and sacrifice and putting someone else's needs before your own. I learned that taking care of Max." Tyler's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Max was thrown away too, left to die because someone decided he wasn't worth fixing. But I saw what everyone else missed. Not broken, just different. Not worthless, but priceless. He taught me that being abandoned doesn't make you unlovable. It just means the person who left wasn't capable of real love." Sarah Beth's lawyer started to object, but Judge Hawkins silenced him with a raised hand. She was leaning forward, completely focused on Tyler's words. "Rose Peterson didn't take advantage of me," Tyler continued. "She saw two damaged souls and decided we were worth saving. She taught me what family really means. It's not about blood, it's about choice. Every day she chooses to love me and Max exactly as we are. Every day we choose to love her back." Tyler knelt beside Max, his hand gentle on the dog's head. "Max can't walk like other dogs, but he's braver than any whole dog I've ever met. When someone tried to hurt me, he put himself between us, even though he knew he couldn't run away. That's not damage. That's courage." He stood again, facing the judge directly. "I know the law says children belong with their biological parents. But law isn't the same as justice. Justice would be letting me stay with the woman who saved my life and the dog who taught me how to love. Justice would be recognizing that family is made by actions, not accidents of birth." The courtroom was completely silent when Tyler finished. Sarah Beth was crying real tears now, perhaps finally understanding what she'd lost when she chose drugs over her son. Rose Peterson's face shone with pride and heartbreak, knowing that Tyler's courage might not be enough to overcome legal precedent. Judge Hawkins sat quietly for a long moment, studying the papers before her. Then she did something unprecedented in her 20 years on the bench. She asked for a 15-minute recess and left the courtroom. During those 15 minutes, Frank Miller appeared in the gallery. Tyler hadn't seen him since the confrontation at Dr. Mitchell's clinic months ago, and his presence was puzzling until he approached Rose's legal team. "I need to testify," Frank said quietly, his voice carrying none of its former anger. "There's something the court needs to know about that boy and his dog." Margaret Chen looked skeptical. "Mr. Miller, your previous statements about German Shepherds are well documented. I'm not sure your testimony would help Tyler's case." "That's exactly why I need to speak," Frank replied, his weathered face etched with something that looked like redemption. "I've been wrong about everything, and that kid deserves better than my mistakes." When court reconvened, Judge Hawkins called Frank Miller to the stand. The courtroom buzzed with confusion. This man was known throughout the county for his hatred of German Shepherds, his belief that they were inherently dangerous. "Mr. Miller," Margaret Chen began carefully, "what is your relationship to this case?" Frank took a deep breath, looking directly at Tyler and Max before answering. "That boy's dog came from my ranch. I ordered him thrown away because of his disability and his breed. I was wrong on both counts." The admission sent ripples through the courtroom. Frank continued, his voice growing stronger. 3 years ago, my son Tommy was killed by a German Shepherd. I blamed the entire breed, saw them all as killers, but Tommy didn't die because German Shepherds are evil. He died because one dog wasn't properly trained or socialized. Frank's eyes found Tyler again. "That boy took my discarded animal and turned him into something beautiful. He showed more compassion and responsibility than I've shown in years. That dog would die for him, and he'd do the same for the dog. That's not dysfunction. That's the purest love I've ever witnessed." "Why are you telling the court this?" Margaret asked. "Because I've watched them together over these past months. That boy doesn't need to be saved from his situation. He needs to be protected in it. He's built something real with Mrs. Peterson and that dog, something I threw away when I let grief make my choices." Frank's voice broke slightly. "My Tommy would be ashamed of the man I became after he died, but he'd be proud of Tyler Matthews. That boy has the kind of heart my son had, the kind that sees worth where others see waste." When Frank stepped down, the courtroom was transformed. Sarah Beth's lawyer looked deflated, his carefully constructed case crumbling under the weight of Frank Miller's unexpected testimony. Sarah Beth herself sat staring at her hands, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost and what she was trying to destroy. Judge Hawkins called for another recess, this one lasting nearly an hour. When she returned, her expression was unreadable, but Tyler thought he detected something that might have been hope in her eyes. "This case has presented me with an extraordinary situation," Judge Hawkins began. "We have a child who has demonstrated remarkable maturity and resilience, an elderly woman who has provided exemplary care, and a mother who claims to have reformed her life." Tyler held his breath, Max pressing closer against his legs as if sensing the critical nature of this moment. "However," the judge continued, "this court's primary responsibility is to serve the best interests of the child, not the convenience of legal precedent or the desires of adults who have already proven their unreliability." Tyler's heart hammered against his ribs as Judge Hawkins continued her deliberation, each word carrying the weight of his entire future. Judge Patricia Hawkins had presided over family court for 20 years, but she'd never encountered a case that challenged every assumption about family, love, and legal precedent quite like Tyler Matthews and his 3-legged German Shepherd. As she looked out over the silent courtroom, she saw not just a legal decision waiting to be made, but a defining moment that would ripple through multiple lives for years to come. "In my 2 decades on this bench," Judge Hawkins began, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom, "I have seen families torn apart by addiction, children bounced between foster homes, and biological parents who view their children as possessions rather than individuals deserving of love and stability." Tyler's hand tightened on Max's collar, feeling the dog's steady heartbeat against his palm. Across the courtroom, Sarah Beth Matthews sat with her lawyer, her carefully composed facade beginning to crack as she sensed the direction of the judge's thoughts. Ms. Matthews," Judge Hawkins continued, addressing Tyler's biological mother directly, "your history with your son shows a pattern of abandonment followed by promises of reform. While I applaud your recent sobriety, 90 days of clean living cannot erase years of neglect and abandonment." Sarah Beth's lawyer started to object, but the judge raised her hand for silence. "Furthermore," Judge Hawkins said, "your attitude toward Tyler's companion animal reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of the therapeutic relationship that has clearly been central to your son's healing and development. You see Max as damaged and disposable, the same way you treated Tyler when his needs became inconvenient." The words hit Sarah Beth like physical blows. For the first time in months, her mask of reformed motherhood slipped entirely, revealing the calculating woman underneath who saw this court case as an opportunity for media attention and potential profit rather than genuine reconciliation. "Mrs. Peterson," Judge Hawkins turned to Rose, whose weathered hands gripped her purse with white-knuckled intensity. "You have provided Tyler with stability, education, medical care for his companion, and most importantly, unconditional love. Your home has become a sanctuary for both boy and dog." Rose's eyes filled with tears of hope and terror, understanding that this moment balanced on a knife's edge between triumph and heartbreak. "However," the judge continued, "I cannot simply disregard parental rights, even when those rights have been poorly exercised in the past. The law exists to protect families, even imperfect ones." Tyler felt his world begin to crumble. Despite Frank Miller's testimony, despite his own words, despite everything they'd built together, the legal system was about to tear apart the only real family he'd ever known. But Judge Hawkins wasn't finished. "Which is why," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I am ordering a 6-month supervised reunification program. Miss Matthews, you will have the opportunity to rebuild your relationship with Tyler under strict court supervision. You will undergo weekly drug testing, attend family counseling sessions, and demonstrate your ability to provide a stable home environment." Sarah Beth's lawyer smiled triumphantly, but Tyler noticed his mother's expression wasn't relief. It was calculation. She was already weighing the costs and benefits of this legal victory, already considering how much effort genuine motherhood would require. "Furthermore," Judge Hawkins continued, and her next words would echo through the courtroom for years to come, "I am issuing a special provision regarding Tyler's companion animal. Max is not merely a pet. He is a documented therapy animal whose presence has been crucial to Tyler's emotional stability and development. Any attempt to separate Tyler from Max, or to provide inadequate care for the animal's special needs, will result in immediate termination of parental rights." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of surprise. Never before had a family court judge made a child's pet a condition of parental custody. But then again, this was no ordinary case. Tyler looked down at Max, whose intelligent dark eyes seemed to understand that their fate remained uncertain. The 6-month reunification period stretched ahead like a minefield, fraught with opportunities for his mother to fail them both. "Your Honor," Sarah Beth's lawyer interjected, "my client was not prepared for the financial responsibility of caring for a disabled animal. The medical expenses alone will be her responsibility as Tyler's parent." Judge Hawkins cut him off sharply. "If Miss Matthews is truly committed to rebuilding her relationship with her son, she will understand that Tyler and Max are a package deal. The boy's healing has been intrinsically linked to his care for this animal." Sarah Beth stood slowly, her composure finally cracking completely. "Your Honor, I need time to prepare. The apartment I've rented doesn't allow pets, and I don't know anything about caring for disabled animals." Tyler watched his mother's true priorities reveal themselves in real time. She'd spent months preparing for this court case, But she'd never once considered what Tyler actually needed to be happy and healthy. The realization that genuine motherhood would require sacrifice and inconvenience was written clearly across her face. You have 30 days to secure appropriate housing and demonstrate your ability to care for both Tyler and Max, Judge Hawkins ruled. During this transition period, Tyler will remain with Mrs. Peterson while you prepare. If you cannot meet these requirements, I will reconsider the custody arrangement. It was a lifeline disguised as a legal ruling. Judge Hawkins had essentially given Sarah Beth enough rope to hang herself, betting that a woman who'd chosen drugs over her son multiple times would ultimately choose convenience over the hard work of real parenting. The calculation in Sarah Beth's eyes confirmed the judge's suspicions. Tyler could see his mother weighing her options. Fight for a son who came with expensive complications, or find a graceful way to exit while maintaining her reformed parent image for the documentary cameras. I need to discuss this with my client, Sarah Beth's lawyer said quietly, his confidence evaporating as he realized his client was already mentally backing away from victory. Court is adjourned for today, Judge Hawkins announced. I'll expect a response within 1 week regarding Mrs. Matthews' housing arrangements and care plans for both Tyler and Max. As the courtroom began to empty, Tyler remained seated with Max pressed against his legs. The victory felt hollow, temporary, like a reprieve rather than a resolution. Rose placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her own emotions too complex for easy expression. "It's not over," she whispered. "But it's not lost either." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had been sitting in the gallery throughout the proceedings, approached their small group. Over the months, she'd become more than just Max's veterinarian. She'd become part of their extended family, bound together by their shared understanding of loss and healing. "That was brilliantly done," Sarah said to Rose's lawyer. "Judge Hawkins essentially made it impossible for Tyler's mother to succeed unless she's genuinely committed to his welfare." Margaret Chen nodded grimly. "The judge sees what we all see. This woman isn't ready to be a real mother. She's been playing a role for the cameras, but when faced with the actual work of caring for Tyler and Max, she'll show her true colors." Frank Miller, who had remained in the courtroom after his testimony, approached their group with obvious discomfort. Tyler looked up at the man who had once wanted Max destroyed, seeing something entirely different in his weathered face. "Son," Frank said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know that whatever happens, you did right by that dog. You saw worth where I saw waste, and that makes you a better man than I've been these past few years." Tyler studied Frank's face, seeing genuine remorse and something that might have been redemption. "Max forgives you," Tyler said simply. "Dogs don't hold grudges. Maybe people shouldn't either." Frank's eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since Tommy's funeral. "You're wise beyond your years, Tyler Matthews. That dog of yours is lucky to have you." As they left the courthouse, Tyler walked between Rose and Dr. Sarah, Max limping faithfully at his side. The media crews were waiting outside, cameras and microphones thrust forward like weapons, hungry for a soundbite that would reduce their complex story to entertainment. "Tyler, how do you feel about the judge's decision? Will you be reunited with your mother? What message do you have for other homeless children?" Tyler stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, looking out over the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. He thought about all the words he could say, all the ways he could try to explain what the past 14 months had taught him about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. Instead, he knelt beside Max and spoke directly to his companion. "Come on, boy, let's go home." The simple statement carried more weight than any prepared speech. Home wasn't a place or a legal arrangement. It was wherever he and Max could be together, protected by people who understood that love came in many forms, and that family was built through choice rather than chance. As they walked toward Rose's Crown Victoria, Tyler felt a strange sense of peace, despite the uncertainty ahead. His mother would have to choose between the easy path of abandonment and the difficult path of genuine love. Judge Hawkins had structured the situation so that Sarah Beth's true priorities would reveal themselves within weeks rather than months. Max looked up at Tyler with those intelligent dark eyes that had learned to read human emotion with uncanny accuracy. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A boy who'd learned his worth through loving unconditionally. A dog who'd discovered courage through being loved completely. And the woman who'd chosen to see them both as treasures rather than burdens. The 6-month countdown had begun, but Tyler no longer feared the outcome. He'd learned that real love didn't need legal documents to make it valid, that true family bonds couldn't be broken by court orders, and that sometimes the most broken things created the most beautiful connections. As Rose's car pulled away from the courthouse, Tyler saw his mother standing on the steps, her lawyer speaking urgently in her ear, while documentary cameras captured her every expression. She looked lost, overwhelmed by the reality of what genuine motherhood would require. Tyler felt something he hadn't expected. Not anger or resentment, but pity. His mother was about to learn what he'd discovered 14 months ago in Miller's Gorge, that love wasn't a performance or a legal obligation, but a choice that had to be made new every single day. And some people, Tyler realized with mature sadness, simply weren't capable of making that choice consistently enough to be trusted with someone else's heart. 6 months later, Tyler Matthews stood in the same courthouse where his fate had hung in the balance, but this time the outcome felt inevitable rather than uncertain. Sarah Beth Matthews had lasted exactly 43 days into her court-mandated reunification program before the carefully constructed facade of reformed motherhood finally crumbled completely. It hadn't been dramatic. There was no relapse caught on camera, no spectacular failure that would make for compelling documentary footage. Instead, it had been the quiet accumulation of small failures, the daily revelation that genuine love required more sacrifice than Sarah Beth was willing to make. The apartment she'd rented was too small for Tyler and Max, with a landlord who'd been assured the pet situation was temporary. The job she'd secured lasted only 2 weeks before she was fired for chronic tardiness. The weekly counseling sessions became monthly, then sporadic, then abandoned entirely. But it was her attitude toward Max that had sealed her fate most completely. During supervised visits, Sarah Beth treated the dog like an inconvenient prop in her performance of motherhood. She complained constantly about the cost of his medication, the time required for his physical therapy, the inconvenience of his disability. When Max had a minor setback that required emergency veterinary care, Sarah Beth's first question wasn't about his condition. It was about whether insurance would cover the expense. "She sees him as a burden," Dr. Sarah Mitchell had testified during the final custody hearing. Her attitude toward Tyler's companion animal reveals a fundamental inability to understand unconditional love. Tyler and Max are bonded in a way that's both beautiful and necessary for Tyler's continued emotional development. Any attempt to separate them or treat Max as disposable would be devastating to Tyler's mental health. The judge's final ruling had been swift and decisive. Sarah Beth's parental rights were terminated permanently, and Rose Peterson's petition for adoption was approved without reservation. The legal system that had seemed so threatening 6 months earlier had ultimately recognized what everyone else could see, that Tyler had found his real family, and no biological connection could trump the love and stability he'd discovered in Rose's Victorian mansion. Now, on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after Tyler had first carried Max out of Miller's Gorge, The three of them stood on Rose's front porch watching a moving truck disappear down Elm Street. The last of Tyler's legal belongings, a single box of clothes and personal items, had been delivered from Sarah Beth's abandoned apartment. His mother had left town without a forwarding address, chasing some new opportunity that promised easier rewards than the hard work of loving a complicated child and his disabled dog. "Good riddance," Rose muttered, her usual genteel manner slipping to reveal the fierce protectiveness that had emerged over the past year. "That woman never deserved you, sweetheart." Tyler didn't respond immediately. He was watching Max navigate the porch steps with the confidence that had developed since his latest round of physical therapy. The dog had grown stronger and more agile over the months, learning to compensate for his disability with intelligence and determination that amazed everyone who met him. Doctor. Sarah had fitted him with a specialized brace that provided additional support, and Max now moved with a dignity that made his three-legged gait seem like a choice rather than a limitation. "I feel sorry for her," Tyler said finally, surprising both Rose and himself with the truth of it. "She's going to spend her whole life looking for something she already had and threw away." Rose studied Tyler's profile, marveling at the mature wisdom that had emerged from such difficult circumstances. At 14, Tyler possessed an understanding of love and loss that many adults never achieved. His compassion for the mother who had abandoned him twice spoke to a character that had been forged in hardship but tempered by the unconditional love he'd found with Max and Rose. The sound of car doors slamming drew their attention to the street, where Frank Miller was climbing out of his pickup truck with a large wrapped package in his arms. Over the past months, Frank had become an unexpected ally, his guilt over his initial treatment of Max transforming into something resembling friendship with Tyler and Rose. His visits had become regular occurrences, often bringing supplies for Max or helping with yard work that Rose's aging hands couldn't manage. "Afternoon, folks," Frank called as he approached the porch, his demeanor a world away from the bitter, angry man who had once demanded Max's destruction. "Got something here for the birthday boy." Today marked Max's first birthday, or rather, the anniversary of the day Tyler had rescued him from Miller's Gorge. They decided to celebrate it as Max's birthday since his actual birth date was unknown, making it a dual celebration of survival and salvation. Tyler accepted the package with curiosity, unwrapping it to reveal a custom-made leather collar with Max Matthews engraved on a brass nameplate. Below the name was a simple inscription, "Hero." "Frank," Rose breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful." "Figured he deserved a proper collar," Frank said gruffly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "One that shows he belongs somewhere, that he's valued." Tyler knelt to fasten the new collar around Max's neck, the dog sitting patiently as if he understood the significance of the moment. The leather was soft and supple, clearly expensive, and the brass nameplate caught the afternoon sunlight like a badge of honor. "Thank you," Tyler said simply, but his voice carried depths of gratitude that went far beyond the gift itself. Frank had given them more than a collar. He'd given them acceptance, recognition, and the acknowledgement that Max was indeed a hero in every way that mattered. "Speaking of belonging," Rose said, her voice taking on the tone that Tyler had learned meant important news was coming, "I got a call from the school district yesterday." Tyler's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Despite Rose's tutoring and his obvious intelligence, he'd been dreading the prospect of entering public school. 14 months of living on the streets, followed by a year of legal battles, had left him socially behind his peers, and the thought of navigating typical teenage dynamics felt overwhelming. "They want Max to be part of their new therapy animal program," Rose continued, her smile growing wider. "Apparently, Dr. Mitchell has been working with them to develop a program for students dealing with trauma or anxiety. Max would be one of the first certified therapy dogs in the district. Tyler's anxiety transformed into excitement as he processed this information. "You mean Max could come to school with me?" "Every day," Rose confirmed. "You'd both be pioneering a program that could help other kids who face difficult circumstances. They specifically requested Max because of his disability. They think students will relate to an animal who's overcome challenges." The irony was perfect and beautiful. Max, who had been thrown away because of his disability, would now use that same difference to help other young people navigate their own struggles. The dog, who had been deemed worthless by Frank Miller, would become invaluable to children who understood what it felt like to be different, damaged, or discarded. "What do you think, boy?" Tyler asked, scratching behind Max's ears. "Ready to be a working dog?" Max's tail wagged with enthusiasm that seemed to indicate complete agreement with the plan. Dr. Sarah had often commented on Max's intuitive understanding of human emotion and his natural therapy instincts. He seemed to know when Tyler was having a difficult day, positioning himself close enough to provide comfort without being intrusive. He'd done the same with Rose during her occasional bouts of loneliness for Harold, and even with Frank during his visits when the older man's grief over Tommy would surface unexpectedly. "There's something else," Rose said, her voice taking on a different quality that made Tyler look at her more carefully. "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens to you and Max when I'm gone." "Rose, don't," Tyler started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I'm 79 years old, sweetheart. I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, but we need to be practical." Rose's voice was gentle but firm. "I've been working with my lawyers to set up a trust fund that will ensure you and Max are taken care of no matter what happens. There's enough money to pay for your education through college, Max's veterinary care for his entire life, and a house of your own when you're ready." Tyler felt his throat close with emotion. "Rose, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Rose interrupted, her voice fierce with love. "Harold and I never had children, but God gave us you in our final years. This money has been sitting in banks doing nothing useful. Now it can do what money should do, protect the people we love." Frank cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly moved by the scene unfolding before him. "If you'll excuse me, I'll just go check on that loose board on your back steps." He disappeared around the house, giving Tyler and Rose privacy for this moment that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Tyler had learned enough about loss to understand that Rose's planning wasn't morbid. It was loving. She was ensuring that the family they'd built together would survive even when she couldn't be there to protect it personally. "I don't know how to thank you," Tyler said, his voice breaking with the weight of gratitude. "You already have," Rose replied, pulling him into a hug that smelled of lavender and love. "You gave an old woman purpose when she thought her life was over. You taught me that family isn't about blood or age or any of the things I thought mattered. You and Max saved me just as much as I saved you." Max pushed between them, apparently feeling left out of the emotional moment, and they both laughed as they included him in their group hug. The three of them stood on the porch as the afternoon sun painted everything golden, a makeshift family bound together by choice rather than chance, by love rather than law. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's car pulled into the driveway just as they were breaking apart, and Tyler could see that she had someone with her in the passenger seat. As they got out of the car, Tyler recognized Sheriff Tom Williams, who had been quietly courting Dr. Sarah for the past few months with the patient persistence of a man who understood that some hearts needed time to heal before they could love again. "Hope we're not interrupting," Dr. Sarah called as they approached the porch, "but Tom has some news about the documentary." Tyler's stomach tightened. The documentary crew had been following their story for months, and Tyler had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. He understood that their story might help other children in similar situations, but he hated the idea of his private pain being turned into entertainment. The production company wants to donate all profits to a foundation for homeless youth and disabled animals, Tom explained. They're calling it the Tyler and Max Foundation. Apparently, your story has inspired donations from across the country. Tyler looked down at Max, who was sitting attentively at his feet, the new collar gleaming in the afternoon sun. From discarded puppy to therapy dog to inspiration for a national foundation, Max's journey seemed impossible, but it was happening right before their eyes. "What do you think?" Tyler asked Max, as he always did when facing important decisions. The dog's tail wagged once, a measured response that Tyler had learned to interpret as cautious approval. "I think," Tyler said slowly, "that if our story can help other kids find families like I found mine, then it's worth telling." Rose squeezed his shoulder proudly. "Harold always said that the best way to honor a blessing is to pass it on." As the sun set over Millbrook, Montana, Tyler Matthews sat on his front porch with his adopted grandmother, his three-legged dog, and the extended family they'd gathered around themselves through love and stubbornness and the simple refusal to give up on each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: school, therapy work, the ongoing process of healing from wounds that might never completely disappear. But tonight, they were simply a family, watching the world settle into darkness while they remained surrounded by light. Dear friends, this story reminds us that love isn't found in perfection, but in choosing to see worth where others see waste. Tyler and Max discovered that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes it just means finding creative ways to be whole. In a world that often discards what it deems imperfect, their bond shows us that the most beautiful relationships are often between souls who understand what it means to be unwanted by everyone else. Family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about showing up day after day, choosing love over convenience, and refusing to abandon each other when times get tough. Rose Peterson found purpose in her golden years by opening her heart to an unlikely pair, proving that it's never too late to discover your most important role in life. What unexpected friendship or act of kindness has changed your life? Have you ever found family in places you didn't expect to look? Share your story in the comments below, because every tale of love conquering abandonment reminds us that miracles still happen, one rescued heart at a time.